Hello, people. Welcome back to another video by your good friend Chad Marco. So Halloween is fast approaching, and I decided to go ahead and put together a list of Halloween horror movie recommendations, but not the typical stuff, right? I'm really into like old school survival horror from like the 70s and 80s and things like that. So I thought I would recommend some old school horror movies, and some of these I would consider to be hidden gems. So yeah, that's exactly what we are going to do today. So let me pull up my list here and let's get right into it. Okay, is this okay? So the first movie, and this is in no particular order, I'm just going to list 10 of them. So the first movie is Deep Red, which was made in 1975. It was directed by Dario Argento. So Deep Red is about a man who is a witness to a murder in which the murderer narrowly escapes, which causes him to become obsessed with figuring out who the killer is. Now, this is a pretty lengthy movie with a lot of twists and turns. The typical whodunit kind of murder mystery story with a lot of dialogue and some murder sprinkled in throughout. But I think the best thing about this movie is the twist at the very end. Now, I won't spoil it, but basically the killer is blatantly shown in the early part of the movie, but it's very easy to miss. So I encourage people to watch this and just see if you can pinpoint and locate the killer when they are shown in the beginning, like early part of the movie, because it's clear as day, and they reveal it at the end, and it's gonna have you like, oh my god, how did I miss that? Oh man, but really amazing twist. So the next one is Evil Dead Trap. Of course, not to be confused with Evil Dead. This is a Japanese horror movie. I believe it was created like 1980s or early 90s, something like that. This movie is about a reporting news crew that goes to check out an abandoned warehouse after getting a snuff film sent to them. Curious to know the origins of the tape, and if it's real, they follow the trail and find death. Oh man, but this is another interesting movie with that unique Japanese horror flavor. And throughout the movie, it's rarely clear exactly who is pulling the strings, so to speak. It's unlike the typical slasher movie because you don't get that immediate exposure to someone you can identify as the killer, the culprit, even though bodies are dropping. So it has a strong sense of mystery about it, even though it's very macabre. But this movie is basically dark, unsettling, and very strange. So the next movie is Inferno, which came out in 1980, and it was directed by Dario Argento. So this one is about a man who investigates a strange apartment complex after his sister turns up dead while seeking out the truth behind The Three Mothers, which is a book about three evil witches who cause death and destruction wherever they reside. Now, what's interesting about this is that it's the official sequel to Suspiria, which came out in the, I think, late 1970s, a cult classic horror movie. And there was a Suspiria remake that was made a few years back, but this is the sequel, and it's actually part of a trilogy, the Three Mothers trilogy. And I forget the exact names of each one, but each movie, Suspiria, Inferno, and the Mother of Tears, covers like a different witch. And I think it's the Mother of Sighs, the Mother of Tears, and the Mother of Darkness, if I'm not mistaken. But each one covers a different witch, and this one is basically the second part of the trilogy. But this is a very surreal type of horror movie. The whole experience almost plays out like a bad dream rather than something grounded in reality, but that's what makes it unique and interesting. It's got a very creative use of different colors and lighting, much like Suspiria, well, at least the original one anyway, and it has very gruesome death scenes. But yeah, very surreal type of horror where it's kind of hard to keep track of. Like, it's almost, again, it's almost like a bad dream or nightmare. So the next one is Miss Leslie's Dolls. Now this one is about a group of college kids and their professor who get caught in a bad thunderstorm. So they decide to seek refuge in a creepy old manor inhabited by a strange woman. Now, I guess this might be a spoiler, but I think it's very obvious from the beginning that the woman is actually a man. And part of what makes this an interesting movie to me is how it has underlying transgender themes, somewhat like Psycho or Silence of the Lambs, but much more direct. I don't even know if you would really see anything made like this these days. But yeah, that's I just found it to be kind of interesting because like the motivations and the plot are just heavily tied to transgenderism. But it starts off slow and comfy, but picks up and gets quite creepy as it goes along. The next one is Absurd, which came out in 1981, and it was directed by Joe D'Amato. So this one is about a priest who is hunting down a man who has the ability to heal most serious wounds. But the side effect of this power is that it's driven him mad. And so he kills anyone who crosses his path. Now this one is a pretty straightforward horror movie. I think the early part is carried by some pretty brutal but also kind of funny death scenes. But the climax is really where the movie shines. And before you know it, you found yourself invested in the well-being of the main characters, which is always, good for keeping the viewer on the edge of their seat. So yeah, this is another one that kind of starts off a bit. It actually starts off with some violence. But then it kind of just tapers down a bit, and then it picks up more and more. And I think the ending is really good, very good. So the next one is Killer's Moon, which came out in 1978. Killer's Moon is about a group of psychos who escape from a mental hospital, but all the while they believe they are dreaming because of an experimental treatment where they are told to release their violent tendencies in their dreams during sleep. They happen upon a group of stranded young girls and still thinking they are dreaming and can act without consequence. Well, you know what happens next. So I found this one to be particularly upsetting because of the numerous sexual assaults that occur. Murder is one thing, but sex crimes always hit me a little harder, but in a fucked up way, it's a potent ingredient for fucked up horror. But another thing about this movie though is that it has very dumb survivors. I mean, the actions of the victims will have you screaming and pulling your hair out. Like, just real quick, there was one part in the movie where one of the would-be victims has a shotgun, and like they have a gun. And he ends up putting the gun down and leaving it somewhere, and then has to go get it back late. I mean, just stupid stuff like that. But despite how dark this movie gets, overall, there is this weird lightheartedness to it as well. It's definitely not a comedy horror, but the characters are hard to fully get behind because they are just so stupid. So the next one is the Gates of Hell Trilogy. Now this is 3 movies, but I thought I would just wrap them all up into one. So it's the Gates of Hell Trilogy, which they all came out in the 80s, I believe. And they were directed by Lucio Fulci. And they include City of the Living Dead, House by the Cemetery, and The Beyond. So this is a trilogy of Living Dead zombie themed movies, but none of them seem to be directly connected to the other outside of that. House by the Cemetery is a straightforward monster in the basement slasher horror, but City of the Living Dead is where it gets weird. It kind of reminds me of Inferno a bit in that it has a surreal nightmare-like vibe to it, where even before shit gets wicked, the characters and the setting still feels off. Like nothing there was ever normal to begin with, right? But I think that I think what City and Beyond have in common is just that surreal feeling, but also how the story can be somewhat hard to follow. And it plays out more like a collection of gory death scenes, but still would recommend them. The next one is Don't Go in the House, which came out in 1979. This is what I would consider to be incel core. So this one is about a strange, traumatized man who doesn't really fit in anywhere. He lives with his overbearing and abusive mother, but then comes home one day to find her dead. At first, he is overjoyed to be free from her, but soon her ghost begins to haunt him. Now, not long after that, he begins to lure young women to his house. And well, you know, you just read the title, you can figure out what he does after that. So again, this is like incel core, meaning that it's one of those horror movies where the killer has a trauma-based grudge against women and wants to punish them for that inner pain. Personally, I don't think the death scenes are really all that great, but I think the value of this movie is really in the creepiness of the main character and how he fails to properly interact with the normal world. So the next one is Burial Ground, which came out in 1981, and it was directed by Andre Bianchi. This one is about a group of upper class people who go to vacation at a friend's isolated mansion. This guy, who also happened to be interested in exploring the old tombs of the dead and the occult, and he manages to awaken the dead, who then begin to feast on the living. So this is a rather standard zombie movie for the time. Definitely not the classy, well-written, plot-driven kind like Dawn of the Dead. But what I like about this movie is how cheesy and strange it is. I definitely wouldn't put it on the same level of creative yet cheap horror genius of like an Evil Dead. But I think it has a similar appeal. It's just not as well written or structured. And also the zombie designs I really like, because I think to me it seems like most zombie designs look a bit too human-like, like a human face that's just kind of fucked up. But these zombie designs, they almost seem like ancient zombies or something. Like it's something just so creepy, but also unique about the way they look. And there are also some light incest themes in this movie. Okay, so the last one is The Fun House, which came out in 1981 as well. We got a lot of 1981 movies here. And this was directed by Tobe Hooper, who was also involved in the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So this one is about a group of teens who go to visit a traveling carnival, but decide to stay overnight for some extra fun. One of them ends up stealing a large sum of money from the carnival owner, who then traps them and sends his deformed and savage young son after them. So this is a rather simple horror slasher flick overall, but I do think it's well done for the time and for what it is. Honestly, I would put it just a tier or two below Friday the 13th or Halloween. It doesn't have the same hook that allowed those series to last the test of time, but I would argue they provide a very similar viewing experience in terms of slasher movies of that era. The only thing I would say is that it probably starts off like a bit too slow. It like takes a bit too long to really get to the point. But once it does, it's definitely effective in what it tries to do. So those are my horror hidden gems, old school horror hidden gems recommendations for this Halloween. I hope you guys enjoyed that, and make sure you check out some of these movies. I put my official Chad Marco stamp on them. And I will see you guys later. Johnny.